Hello and welcome to Miss Hasna's Literary Life. Today we are going to be reading Knut, How One Little Polar Bear Captivated the World. This is an expositional text, which means that this is based on truth and not just a made-up story. So let's look at what we have. So this is a note from the author. So you'll actually frequently see these in front of the books about how it came to be. One December afternoon in a cozy, dark enclosure in a zoo in Berlin, Germany, a polar bear cub was born. He was so small that a child could easily have cradled him. His eyes were closed tight, and his pink skin showed through his fine white fur. He was just a tiny polar bear cub, but he would soon be loved by millions of people around the world. His name is Knut, and this is his story. Knut, pronounced Knut, was born on December 5th, 2006 at Zoo Berlin, one of the world's largest and most respected zoos. Thomas Dorfin, the chief bear keeper, and Andre Schul, one of the veterinarians, were on hand when Knut's mother, Tosca, gave birth to two healthy cub brothers. But Thomas and Andre were anxious. Wild animal mothers don't always know how to take care of their babies. If Tosca wasn't able to be the cub's mother, Thomas and Andre would have to try to hand raise them. Thomas and Andre watched Tosca carefully, but she showed little interest in the cubs. So after 5 hours, Thomas carefully gathered them up and rushed them to the small room that would be their first home. The cubs were placed in an incubator, a small heated bed, as they hungrily drank their first meal from baby bottles. A new life began for Thomas. He was to devote the next few months to being an around-the-clock foster father. This is part of our text feature. This is a caption for this picture. Snow dens in the wild get very warm, up to 95 degrees Fahrenheit. So Thomas was careful to keep Knut toasty. The cubs were not given names at first, because it is not unusual for newborn animals to survive only a few days. And unfortunately, on the fourth day, one of the cubs suddenly developed a high fever. Within a few hours, he died. It was a very sad loss, but Thomas and Andre knew that they had done all that they could. Now they focused all their care on the remaining baby. Andre checked the cubs several times a day, but it was Thomas who saw to the cub's every need. The cub could drink only about 4 tablespoons of formula milk at one time. After just 2 hours, he would yelp in hunger again. Day and night, Thomas would boil water, mix the formula, give the cub his bottle, and settle him back down in the incubator. He also had to clean the cub's bedding and sterilize the bottles. Thomas napped when he could. Sterilizing means cleaning really well so that they won't get sick. It was an exhausting routine, but Thomas was determined to give this cub the best possible chance at survival. He even moved a bed and sleeping bag into the cub's room so that he could always be nearby. Mother polar bears groom and nuzzle their cubs a lot, and Thomas was happy to stroke and comfort Knut all he needed. Week after week, the cub's fur grew more thickly. His tummy got plumper and his body got stronger. With his bright black eyes, he looked around at everything. Until the cub was 4 weeks old, Thomas continued to feed him every 2 hours. He also bathed him, brushed him, and rubbed him with baby oil each day. He even played Elvis songs on the guitar for him. Thomas was very, very tired from the endless work, but he came to love the cub as if it were his own baby, and the cub thrived. The tiny bear became the center of Thomas's life, but he missed his own family at home, his partner Daniela and her 5-year-old son Sylvester. They missed him too, but they felt very proud of him. They visited Thomas every day, and on Christmas Eve they arrived with a special dinner, presents, and even a beautifully decorated tree. Their love helped to keep Thomas' spirits up. Finally, when the cub was 32 days old, Thomas decided it was time to give him a permanent name. To Thomas, the cub looked just like a Knut, and so Knut it was. Before Knut was born, Thomas had hand-raised a brown bear cub and a wolf pup. Even when they are little, polar bears have big paws. Thomas and Andre used their expert knowledge about polar bears to take good care of Knut. When Knut outgrew his incubator, they built a wooden sleeping box for him that was the same size as a mother bear's den, about as big as a very large toy chest. They kept the room dark and warm. Since polar bear cubs don't leave their den and don't experience bright light or cold until they are almost 3 months old, and because mother bears stay in their cub's side until that age. Thomas stayed with Knut almost every moment. In fact, Thomas only left the zoo the first time when Knut was 4 months old, and then just for 3 days. Meanwhile, Knut already had thousands of friends outside the zoo. The people of Berlin and soon all of Germany fell in love with Baby Knut and his foster father Thomas. They were eager to visit Knut at the zoo, but his keepers felt that Knut was still too young to appear in public. Just like human babies, Knut woke Thomas up several times each night. By the time Knut was ready to move to his sleeping box, he was strong enough to pull himself along with his front legs. He already loved to tussle with his stuffed animals or blanket. A month later, he took his first wobbly steps on all 4 paws. A week after that, he had his first meal of milk, with a bit of kitten food mixed in, from a bowl. Thomas and Andre laughed as most of the food ended up on Knut's fur on the floor, and very little ended up inside Knut. But he certainly enjoyed it. After that, Knut had his first bath in a small tub. He enjoyed that too. For Knut, every activity is a chance to wrestle, pounce, and play. That is also what tussle means. Tussle is playful playing. Bath time for Knut. Knut eagerly laps up his puppy formula, milk mixed with cat food, corn syrup, and cod liver oil. And this would be designed specifically for polar bears to help them gain weight. On a warm day in March, when Knut was 3 months old, Thomas led him outdoors for the first time. Knut excitedly explored every corner of the small playpen area, but he never strayed far from Thomas. In the sandbox, Knut made 2 discoveries. 1, that sand is not good to eat, and 2, that sand is great fun to roll around in. When he shook out his fur, sand flew everywhere. For Thomas, raising Knut has been very rewarding, but it isn't always easy. One night, Knut climbed out of his sleeping box and awoke Thomas by pouncing on his head. It was the first time that Knut had climbed out on his own. After that, Thomas made sure to close the sleeping box at night. Knut sometimes shows his affection for Thomas by pulling hard on his hair. Thomas lets Knut know that he prefers when Knut licks his face or nuzzles with him nose to nose in a friendly polar bear style greeting. Playing can wear Knut out. And Knut is curious about everything in his world. Finally, the keepers decided that Knut was strong and healthy enough to be viewed by zoo visitors. They announced that on March 23rd, Knut and Thomas would appear in public for 2 hours. Then, a week before the big day, a newspaper reported one man's comment that Knut should not have been rescued after his mother rejected him, because in the wild, a cub would not have been rescued. Knut's fans were shocked. People all over Germany spoke up in support for Knut, Thomas, and Zu Berlin. News of the man's statement and the public's strong reaction against it quickly spread around the world. Suddenly, Knut was an international celebrity. International means all around the world. Thousands of Knut admirers streamed into the zoo the morning of March 23rd. Almost 500 journalists, including camera crews from 100 television stations, arrived to report on Knut's first public appearance. There were reporters and visitors from places far away as Canada, Colombia, Pakistan, Japan, and New Zealand. And when Thomas and Knut stepped out into the enclosure, the crowd cheered as if it were movie stars. As German announcers put it, Knut der Astrobaby Superstar. So this is German, and they're saying Knut's a superstar. And Knut may be little, but he moves fast. For Thomas, who was rather shy at all this fame, was quite surprised. But he did his best to give all his attention to Knut, and all Knut wanted to do was play. So with Knut's favorite green blanket, Thomas and Knut played tug-of-war. Then Knut clambered on the rocks and wrestled with his ball. He charmed everyone. Day after day, huge crowds came to admire Knut as he played with his keepers and his sticks, balls, and teddy bears. As people's love for Knut grew, many thought about Knut's polar bear cousins in the wild. With temperatures rising around the globe, the icy regions where polar bears live are shrinking. Some scientists even believe that polar bears could become extinct during our lifetime. Many of Knut's new friends realized what the world might lose and started to ask what they could do to help. Sometimes Knut plays too rough with his toys. Sometimes our kids do too, huh? After rolling in sand, Knut looks more like a brown bear than a polar bear. With his cute waddle and playful spirit, it was hard not to love Knut. He received as many as 200 letters each week. People of all ages sent poems and other words of friendship. Children who were too young to write drew pictures for Knut. Everyone wanted Knut to know how happy he made them feel. One day, visitors worried when, rather than playing, Knut lay on the ground, holding his paws over his eyes or on his swollen cheek. Over the next few days, Knut and Thomas didn't make their usual public appearances. Was Knut sick? It turned out that because Knut's permanent teeth were coming in, his mouth was sore. Thomas helped Knut feel better by rubbing his gums and by letting Knut cuddle with him when he slept. Before long, Knut was back, as lively and full of fun as ever. Knut and Thomas exchanging a polar bear kiss. When Knut was teething, Thomas spent the night next to Knut in his box to comfort him. Thomas's favorite times with Knut happen away from the crowds. Every morning before the zoo opens, Thomas leads Knut on a walk through the zoo grounds. It was during these early morning walks that Thomas gave Knut his first swimming lessons. Knut already enjoyed wading in the shallow water, but when Thomas dove into deep water and called to Knut to follow him, Knut hesitated. Thomas patiently encouraged him until Knut finally jumped in. Before long, Knut was swimming around in polar bear fashion, paddling with his front legs and using his back legs to steer. Just as a bear mother would, Thomas makes sure that Knut's boisterous energy doesn't get out of hand. If Knut grows impatient before a feeding and starts to nip, Thomas will warn him, "Nein, nein," until Knut stops. And nip means gently bite. Usually, Knut listens well. When Thomas calls, "Knut, come," Knut always comes running. When Knut misbehaves, Thomas gently but firmly corrects him. All polar bears love water, but they need an adult to teach them how to swim.